That night, one bracelet changed everything. Before the appetizers were cleared, before the bill was paid, before anyone in that Manhattan restaurant understood what they were witnessing, Teresa Marquez learned that some objects don't just carry memories, they carry consequences. This is the story of how a 7-year-old waitress became the most dangerous person in Enzo Moretti's world, simply by showing up to work wearing the wrong piece of jewelry. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Paradiso was the kind of restaurant where silence cost extra. The tables were spaced far enough apart that conversations stayed private, the music was instrumental and forgettable, and the staff moved like well-trained ghosts. It catered to Manhattan's power players, the ones who signed deals over rare wine and discussed mergers in hushed tones between courses. Teresa had learned quickly that her job wasn't just to serve food, it was to see nothing, hear nothing, and remember even less. She was good at it. 27 years old, sharp-minded but perpetually broke, she'd spent most of her life perfecting the skill of invisibility. Foster care had taught her that. 6 different homes before she aged out of the system, each one training her to read a room instantly, to know when to speak and when to vanish. Now she used those same survival instincts to navigate the dining room, anticipating needs before they were voiced, clearing tables without interrupting conversation. The silver bracelet on her wrist was the only thing she owned that wasn't second-hand or practical. A thin chain, delicate and worn, with a charm in the shape of an intricate knot. She'd had it for as long as she could remember, which wasn't saying much, considering the gaps in her memory from her early childhood. It was pretty. It was hers. That was enough. Enzo Moretti arrived without a reservation. That alone told you everything. Paradiso didn't seat walk-ins, especially not at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. But when Enzo Moretti walked through the door with 5 men in dark suits trailing behind him, the maître d' didn't ask questions. He simply gestured toward the most private booth in the house and began rearranging reservations in his head. Teresa was refilling water glasses 2 tables over when she first saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of controlled precision that suggested violence was always an option, just never the first one. His suit was midnight blue and flawless, his expression carved from granite. He didn't look around the room the way most guests did. He looked through it, past it, as if the only things that mattered were the ones he chose to focus on. She didn't recognize him. She should have. By the time she reached his table, her smile was already in place. Pleasant, professional, practiced. She pulled out her notepad. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you off with—" Enzo moved. 1 second she was standing there, pen poised. The next, his hand was locked around her wrist like a steel trap, yanking her forward hard enough that she stumbled against the edge of the table. Her notepad flew. Her breath caught. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, but his grip was iron, and his eyes, God, his eyes were fixed on the bracelet with an intensity that was almost feral. "Where?" he said, his voice lethal and quiet. "Is the other one?" Teresa's brain, short-circuited. The men at the table were already moving, rising slightly from their seats, hands inside their jackets. The dining room had gone silent. She could feel dozens of eyes on them, everyone frozen, mid-bite, mid-sip, mid-breath. "Let go of me," she hissed, fear turning instantly to anger because fear had never kept her safe before. Enzo ignored her. His thumb traced the knotted charm with a gentleness that completely contradicted the bruising strength of his grip. "This bracelet?" he said, and there was something raw in his voice now, something broken. "It's one of 2, identical, made by a jeweler in Florence 20 years ago. I gave them to someone." His eyes snapped up to hers, and the pain there hit her like a physical blow. "So tell me how the hell you have it." Teresa's first instinct was to lie. Her second instinct was to run. She did neither. Instead, she looked Enzo Moretti dead in the eye and said, "I've had this bracelet since I was 7 years old. I don't know where it came from. I don't know who your sister is, and I definitely don't know why you think manhandling your waitress is an appropriate response to seeing jewelry you recognize." The men at the table shifted. One of them, thick-necked, with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, started to rise. Enzo lifted 2 fingers, and the man froze like he'd been turned to stone. 7 years old, Enzo repeated slowly, his grip on her wrist unchanging. His thumb was still tracing the knotted charm with unsettling tenderness. "You're telling me you've had this for 20 years. I'm telling you I've had it for as long as I can remember, which isn't the same thing." Teresa yanked her arm back hard enough that pain shot through her shoulder, but his hold didn't budge. She switched tactics, letting her body go still, her voice dropping to something sharp and cold. "You want to call the cops? Go ahead. I'm sure they'd love to hear about the guy who assaulted a waitress over a piece of jewelry she bought at a thrift store." It was a bluff. She hadn't bought it at a thrift store. But he didn't know that. Enzo's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, maybe. Assessment. "You didn't buy this at a thrift store," he said quietly. "This was commissioned, custom-made. There are only 2 in existence, and the man who created them died 15 years ago." Teresa's stomach dropped, but she kept her face neutral. Foster care had taught her that, too, how to lie with your expression even when your insides were screaming. Then, maybe someone copied it. Maybe your jeweler wasn't as exclusive as you thought. Maybe you're wrong. I'm not wrong. Everyone's wrong sometimes, even guys who walk into restaurants like they own the building. She paused, then added with deliberate bite, "Do you? Own the building?" One of the men at the table made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Enzo's jaw tightened, but his eyes never left hers. The intensity there was suffocating, like being trapped under a spotlight that saw too much. "You're not afraid of me," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I'm terrified of you," Teresa corrected. "I'm just not stupid enough to show it. Now either let go of my wrist or explain what the hell you want from me, because I've got 6 other tables and my shift ends in 3 hours. For a long, airless moment, Enzo didn't move. Then, slowly, he released her. Teresa stepped back immediately, cradling her wrist against her chest. The bracelet caught the light, glinting silver. Enzo leaned back in his seat, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his eyes remained locked on her like a predator tracking prey. "Sit down. I'm working." "Not anymore." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down." Teresa glanced toward the kitchen, where the sous chef was watching through the window with wide eyes. The maître d' had vanished entirely. No help was coming. She was on her own, the way she'd always been. She sat. Enzo folded his hands on the table, the picture of composed authority. 20 years ago, my twin sister was taken. She was 14. I was 14. We were at our family's estate in Tuscany for the summer. His voice was flat, clinical, like he was reciting facts that had been carved into his bones. She was wearing a bracelet identical to the one on your wrist. I was wearing the other. Our grandmother had them made for us, a pair, to keep us connected no matter where we went. Teresa said nothing. Her mind was racing, trying to fit pieces together that didn't make sense. The day she disappeared, Enzo continued, her bracelet was gone. Taken. The police assumed the kidnapper kept it as a trophy, or sold it, or destroyed it. For 20 years I've had people looking, jewelers, collectors, auction houses, pawn shops across 3 continents. His gaze bore into her. And now it shows up on the wrist of a waitress in Manhattan who claims she's had it since she was 7. I don't claim anything, Teresa shot back. I'm telling you the truth. I don't know your sister. I don't know how I got this bracelet. My childhood is... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. It's complicated. Foster care, okay? I bounced around. Records are incomplete. I barely remember anything before I was 8. Enzo's expression shifted, just slightly. Foster care. Yeah. Shocking, right? Not everyone grows up in a Tuscan estate. The sarcasm was reflexive, a shield. What do you remember? About what? About when you got the bracelet. Teresa hesitated. This was dangerous territory, but something in his tone, the rawness beneath the control, made her answer honestly. I remember a woman, not her face, just her hands. She put it on my wrist. She said it would keep me safe. She swallowed. That's it. That's all I've got. Enzo was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You're connected to my sister's disappearance. Or, Teresa countered, her voice hardening, I'm a kid who got shuffled through the system and happened to end up with a bracelet that looks like yours. Correlation isn't causation. I don't believe in coincidences. Well, I don't believe in cosmic jewelry conspiracies, so I guess we're at an impasse. She started to stand. If you'll excuse me, I'll pay you $50,000. Teresa froze halfway out of her chair. What? Sit down, Enzo said again, and this time she did, slowly. I'll pay you $50,000 to help me find my sister, or at the very least, to help me understand how you got that bracelet. I just told you I don't know, but you can find out. He leaned forward, his intensity ratcheting up. You worked in foster care. You know the system. You have access to records, contacts, information I can't get through normal channels. I was in foster care, Teresa corrected. I don't work there. And even if I did, do you know how many privacy laws you're asking me to break? I know exactly how many. I'll double it. 100,000. Her breath caught. $100,000. That was rent for 2 years. That was college. That was a life that didn't involve grease-stained aprons and aching feet and wondering if she'd make it to 30 before she burned out completely. But she wasn't an idiot. What's the catch? She asked. No catch. You help me find answers. I pay you. And if I can't find answers? Then you keep the money anyway. Enzo's voice dropped. But I don't think that's going to be a problem. Why not? Because, he said, his gaze sharpening, you're lying about something. I don't know what yet, but you are. And people only lie when they're hiding something worth protecting. Teresa's pulse spiked, but she forced herself to stay calm. You're wrong. Then prove it. The challenge hung between them, electric and dangerous. Teresa's mind spun through the options. She could walk away. She could tell him to go to hell. She could. But $100,000. And something else. Something she didn't want to admit, even to herself. A gnawing, lifelong question about where she'd come from, who she'd been before the system swallowed her whole. Maybe this was her chance to finally get answers. I want $200,000, she said. Enzo's eyebrows rose fractionally. Excuse me? You heard me. 200,000. And I don't work for you, I work with you. Equal partnership. You don't give me orders, you don't threaten me, and you definitely don't grab me again. She crossed her arms. Those are my terms. One of the men at the table muttered something in Italian that sounded like a curse. Enzo silenced him with a look, then turned back to Teresa. For the first time since he'd walked into Paradiso, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. You have nerve, he said. I have a photographic memory, Teresa replied. The air in the booth went still. Enzo blinked. What? You want to know how I'm going to find your sister faster than your whole organization? Teresa leaned forward, matching his intensity. I remember everything. Every face, every document, every case file I've ever seen. Perfect recall. I developed it in foster care because it was the only way to keep track of which lies I told to which social worker. She tapped her temple. You've got money and muscle. I've got something better. I've got a brain that doesn't forget. Enzo stared at her. Really stared, like he was seeing her for the first time. Then, slowly, he extended his hand across the table. 200,000, he said. Equal partnership, you have my word. Teresa looked at his hand. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was going to blow up her entire life. She shook it anyway. "Then I guess you just hired yourself a special investigator," she said. "When do we start?" Enzo's smile was sharp and brief, like a blade catching light. "Right now." Enzo's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking Central Park. Teresa knew this because the elevator ride took 45 seconds, during which nobody spoke, and she became acutely aware that she was still wearing her burgundy work vest and smelled faintly of kitchen grease. The 2 men flanking her, including Scar Eyebrow from the restaurant, kept their eyes forward, hands clasped in front of them like Secret Service agents guarding someone considerably more important than a waitress who'd just made the worst decision of her life. When the elevator doors opened, Teresa stepped into a world that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd confused luxury with morgue. Everything was white. White marble floors, white leather furniture, white walls stretching up to double-height ceilings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of Manhattan's glittering skyline, but somehow the space felt suffocating, sterile, like a museum exhibit titled, "How Rich People Forget to Live." "Wow," Teresa said, her voice echoing in the cavernous entryway. "It's like a hospital had a baby with a modern art gallery. Do you actually live here, or do you just come here to practice being emotionally unavailable?" Scar Eyebrow made a strangled sound. Enzo, stepping out of the elevator behind her, didn't react immediately. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "The guest suite is on the 2nd level. Marco will show you." "Marco." Teresa turned to Scar Eyebrow. "That's you?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. I'm 27, not 70. She glanced back at Enzo. "Guest suite? I thought we were working." "We are." Enzo shrugged out of his suit jacket, draping it over the back of a white chair with the casual precision of someone who'd never had to pick up after himself. "But you're not going back to your apartment." Teresa's spine stiffened. "Excuse me? You're connected to a 20-year-old kidnapping. You're wearing evidence on your wrist. And as of 1 hour ago you became my employee." His dark eyes met hers, flat and final. "That makes you a target. You stay here, where I can protect you." "Protect me," Teresa repeated slowly. "Or control me? Is there a difference?" "Yeah. One involves respecting my autonomy, and the other involves you turning into the overbearing mafia boss I'm really hoping you're not." For the first time since they'd left Paradiso, Enzo's expression shifted, something that might have been amusement tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You agreed to equal partnership. That means you follow security protocols." "Security protocols?" Teresa said. "Or house arrest?" "There's a difference." "Is there?" They stared at each other. The air between them crackled with challenge, neither willing to look away first. Marco shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them like he was watching a tennis match conducted entirely in tension. Finally, Enzo said, "You're free to leave any time, but if you walk out that door, the deal is off. No money, no answers." He paused. "No protection." Teresa's jaw tightened. He was right, and she hated it. Out there, she was vulnerable. In here, she was trapped. Different prisons, same bars. "Fine," she said. "Show me the guest suite, but I'm going back to my apartment tomorrow to get my things, and you're not going to stop me. We'll discuss it tomorrow." "There's nothing to discuss." "Marco," Enzo said, ignoring her entirely. "Show her the suite, then bring the files to the study." The guest suite turned out to be larger than Teresa's entire apartment. It had a king-sized bed, a walk-in closet, a bathroom with a tub big enough to drown in, and its own sitting area with yet another view of the park. Everything was pristine, untouched, like a hotel room awaiting its first guest. Teresa dropped onto the bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. What the hell had she just agreed to? 20 minutes later, Marco knocked and informed her that Mr. Moretti was ready for her in the study. Teresa considered ignoring the summons out of spite, then decided that passive resistance wouldn't get her anywhere. She needed to prove her worth, fast. The study was smaller than the main living space, but no less intimidating. Dark wood bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked expensive and unread. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, and behind it, Enzo sat in a high-backed chair, 3 file boxes stacked beside him. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Teresa sat. "You know, you could try saying, 'please,' occasionally. It's a weird little word people use to pretend they're not authoritarians." Enzo's lips twitched. "Please, sit." Too late. Already sitting. The moments passed. He opened the first file box, pulling out a thick manila folder. "These are the original case files from my sister's disappearance. Police reports, witness statements, forensic analysis, everything the Italian authorities compiled in the first 6 months." He slid the folder across the desk. "I need you to read them." "All of them?" "All of them." "That's got to be 300 pages. 412, Enzo corrected. "You said you had perfect recall. Prove it." Teresa picked up the folder, flipping it open. The first page was a police report, dated the 15th of July, 2005, written in Italian. "I don't speak Italian." "Then it's a good thing I do." Enzo leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Read. I'll translate anything you need." For the next 2 hours, Teresa read. She absorbed every word, every detail, every photograph, crime scene images of the estate's garden where Enzo's sister Sofia, her name was Sofia, had last been seen. Witness statements from staff members who'd heard nothing, seen nothing. Forensic reports on tire tracks found near the service entrance. A grainy security photo of a dark sedan with an obscured license plate. Enzo translated the Italian sections without being asked, his voice low and controlled, but Teresa could hear the strain beneath it. This wasn't just a case to him, it was a wound that had never healed. By the time she reached the surveillance footage, Still's 12 blurry photographs taken from the estate's main gate camera, her head was pounding. She stared at the images, her photographic memory cataloging every detail, the angle of the sedan, the position of the trees, the shadow in the driver's seat, barely visible. And then she saw it. A reflection in the car's side mirror. Tiny, almost imperceptible, but there, a second figure, standing behind the gatepost. Teresa's vision tunneled, her breath shortened. The room tilted sideways, and suddenly she wasn't in the study anymore. She was 7 years old, standing in a parking lot, holding someone's hand. A woman's voice, urgent and scared. "Don't look back. Just keep walking. Teresa." The memory fractured, dissolving like smoke. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Teresa?" Enzo's voice was sharper now, closer. She blinked, and he was there, standing in front of her, no longer behind the desk. His hands hovered near her shoulders, not touching but ready to catch her if she fell. "I'm fine," she managed, but her voice shook. "You're not." His eyes searched her face, and for the first time since they'd met, the control slipped. He looked concerned. Actually, genuinely concerned. "What happened?" She swallowed hard. "I saw something. In the photo, there's a second person in the reflection." Enzo's expression sharpened instantly. "Where?" "The side mirror." "Fourth photo. There's someone behind the gate post." She forced herself to breathe evenly. "But that's not what I remembered something. When I was looking at it, a memory. Not from the photo, from my life." "What kind of memory?" "I don't know. A woman, a parking lot." She was scared. Teresa pressed her palms against her eyes. "It's gone now. It's always gone." "Always?" "I remember everything I see now. But my childhood before I was 8, it's fragments. Pieces that don't fit together." She dropped her hands, meeting his gaze. "Whatever happened to me back then, someone made sure I wouldn't remember it." Enzo was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and cupped the side of her face, his palm warm against her cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate, that Teresa froze. "You're helping me find my sister," he said quietly. "But I think in the process you're going to find yourself." Teresa's pulse hammered in her throat. He was close, too close. She could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his dark eyes had softened into something that looked almost like tenderness. This was dangerous. Not the guns and violence kind of dangerous, the kind that made you forget why you'd put walls up in the first place. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what? Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm something worth protecting." Enzo's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and the touch sent electricity racing down her spine. "You are. You don't even know me. I know you're the first person in 20 years who's gotten this close to the truth." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "I know you're fearless and reckless, and you don't back down even when you should. I know you made a deal with a man you should be terrified of because you wanted answers more than you wanted safety." His hand slid to the back of her neck, his fingers threading through her hair. "That's enough." Teresa should have pulled away, should have reminded him about professional boundaries and equal partnerships and all the very good reasons why this was a spectacularly bad idea. Instead, she leaned into his touch, just slightly, and watched his eyes darken. "This is a terrible idea," she said. "I know. We just met. I know. I don't even like you." Enzo's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. Liar. And God help her. He was right. They stayed like that for 3 heartbeats, Enzo's hand cradling the back of Teresa's neck, her breath shallow and uneven, the space between them charged with something neither was willing to name. Then Teresa pulled back, not violently. Just enough to break the contact, to remind herself that she needed air and distance, and approximately 5 minutes to remember why getting involved with a mafia boss was a catastrophically stupid idea. Enzo let her go immediately, his hand falling to his side, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. Dark, intense, still seeing too much. "I need to look at the photos again," Teresa said, her voice steadier than she felt. She stood, moving back to the desk, putting furniture between them like a barricade. "The reflection. There's something else." Enzo didn't argue. He returned to his chair, sliding the surveillance stills back across the desk toward her. "Show me." Teresa picked up the 4th photograph, the one that had triggered her memory fragment. She studied it with the clinical focus she'd developed over years of forced compartmentalization, the sedan, the gate, the barely visible figure in the side mirror reflection. But now, with her pulse still racing and her mind sharp from adrenaline, she saw more. "The person behind the gatepost," she said slowly. "They're wearing something on their left arm. A watch. Maybe. Or..." She pulled the photo closer, her photographic memory layering the image with crystalline clarity. "No, not a watch. A cufflink. You can see it catching the light." Enzo leaned forward. "Cufflinks aren't unusual. This one is. Look at the shape." She traced the tiny glint of metal with her fingernail. "It's not round. It's rectangular, with something engraved on it. A logo, maybe." "You can't possibly see that level of detail in a 20-year-old surveillance photo." "I can see it because I remember it." Teresa set the photo down, her mind already racing ahead, connecting threads. "And I've seen that same cufflink before. Today. In this apartment." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Enzo's expression went completely still, his eyes flattening into something cold and lethal. "Where?" "Marco." Teresa's voice was quiet but certain. "When he showed me to the guest suite, I noticed his cufflinks. They're distinctive, rectangular, silver, with an engraved family crest. A lion and a sword. The Rinaldi crest," Enzo said, his voice deadly calm. "I don't know what that means. It means Marco's family has been associated with mine for 3 generations." Enzo stood slowly, moving to the window, his back to her. "His father was my father's consigliere. Marco took over the position 8 years ago, after his father died. Teresa's stomach twisted. Enzo. He was 17 when Sofia was taken. Enzo's reflection in the glass was hollow, distant. He was at the estate that summer. He helped search for her. A pause. He stood next to me at the funeral we held when the police closed the case. It might not be him, Teresa said, though the certainty in her gut told her otherwise. It could be coincidence, someone else with the same cufflinks. You don't believe that? No, she admitted. I don't. Enzo turned back to face her, and the raw pain in his eyes made her chest ache. For 20 years I've trusted him. He's been in every meeting, every decision. He knows every weakness, every secret. His hands curled into fists at his sides. If he took Sofia, if he's been lying to me for 2 decades, then we prove it before we accuse him, Teresa interrupted, her voice firm. We don't have enough yet. A cufflink in a reflection isn't evidence. It's a lead. She moved closer, closing the distance between them again. You hired me to find the truth. Let me do my job. Enzo's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, why are you doing this? What? This. He gestured between them. You could have walked away at the restaurant. You could have taken the money and disappeared. Instead, you're standing in my home, hunting a ghost that isn't even yours. His eyes searched her face. Why? Teresa hesitated. This was the part she never talked about, the part she'd buried so deep that even her photographic memory couldn't retrieve it without causing her physical pain. But something about Enzo, about the shared weight of their losses, about the way he'd touched her face like she was something precious instead of something broken, made her want to try. The bracelet, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I told you I've had it since I was 7. That's true, but I lied about not knowing where it came from. Enzo went very still. You remember. Fragments, pieces. Teresa wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. I remember a woman putting it on my wrist. She said it would keep me safe. She said, her voice cracked, she said she'd come back for me. But she didn't. No, she didn't. Teresa forced herself to meet his eyes. 3 days later, I was in foster care. The social worker who found me said I'd been left at a fire station in Queens. No nota, no explanation. Just a 7-year-old girl with a bracelet and no memory of her own name. Enzo's expression shifted, softening into something that looked like recognition. Teresa isn't your birth name. I don't know what my birth name was. Teresa is what the social worker called me because I wouldn't tell them anything else. She laughed bitterly. Turns out, selective amnesia is a great coping mechanism when you're a traumatized kid. My brain just locked it all away. Everything before that night, and the harder I tried to remember, the more it hurt, so eventually I just stopped trying. Until now. Until now. Teresa touched the bracelet on her wrist, the metal warm against her skin. I want to find your sister, Enzo, but I also need to find out who I was, where I came from. Why someone left me with a piece of jewelry that connects me to a kidnapping that happened on another continent. She swallowed hard. Maybe they're the same mystery. Maybe they're not. But either way, I'm not walking away until I know. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with shared understanding. Enzo closed the distance between them in 3 steps. This time, when he reached for her, he didn't hesitate. His hands framed her face, tilting her head up so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. My father and Marco's father were rivals, he said quietly, before they became partners. My grandfather chose my father to lead the family, and Marco's father never forgave him for it. He spent 30 years pretending to be loyal while poisoning my father's decisions from the inside. Enzo's thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. When my father died, Marco inherited that grudge. And taking Sofia wasn't about money or power, it was about destroying the one thing I loved more than anything else in the world. Revenge, Teresa whispered. Slow, methodical, designed to cripple me emotionally while keeping me dependent on the man who caused the wound. Enzo's voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. For 20 years, I've been living in a cage built by my enemy, and I didn't even know it. Teresa's hands came up to cover his, her fingers threading through his. We're going to find her, and we're going to make him pay. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Her voice was fierce now, burning with the same intensity she saw reflected in his eyes. You said I'm worth protecting. Well, so are you. And so is Sophia. And so is whoever that woman was who gave me this bracelet and then disappeared. She leaned into his touch, her forehead nearly brushing his. We both have scars, Enzo. But maybe we can use them to find each other's missing pieces. Something broke in Enzo's expression, the last wall he'd been holding up, finally crumbling under the weight of shared pain and desperate hope. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was raw and consuming, born from years of grief and anger and the sudden, shocking realization that he wasn't alone anymore. His hands slid into her hair, pulling her closer, and Teresa responded with equal desperation, her fingers clutching the front of his shirt like he was the only solid thing in a world that had spent her entire life trying to pull her under. She tasted like defiance and courage. He tasted like control finally surrendered. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Teresa's eyes were bright and fierce. We're going to burn his world down, she whispered against Enzo's mouth. Enzo's smile was sharp and dangerous and absolutely lethal. From the inside out, they spent the next 18 hours buried in files. Teresa commandeered the study, spreading documents across every available surface: police reports, financial records, personnel files, surveillance logs. She moved through them with methodical precision, her photographic memory absorbing every detail, cross-referencing information that had lived in separate folders for 20 years. Enzo watched her work with something close to fascination. She was relentless, barely stopping to eat or sleep, her focus absolute. Every few hours she'd surface with a new connection, a new thread to pull. Marco visited Italy 6 times in the year before Sophia's kidnapping, she said at 3 a.m., tapping a travel manifest. Always alone, always for family business. But look, she slid another document across to him. His father's records show he was in New York during 4 of those trips. So, who was Marco meeting with? By dawn, the pattern had emerged. Marco hadn't just orchestrated the kidnapping. He'd spent years building a network designed to keep Sophia hidden while simultaneously positioning himself as Enzo's most trusted advisor. Every dead end in the investigation, every false lead, Marco had been there, steering them away from the truth. He's been playing a 20-year game, Teresa said, staring at the web of connections she'd mapped out on the floor. And he's patient, methodical. She looked up at Enzo. But now we've exposed him, which means he'll accelerate, Enzo finished. His expression was granite. He'll move to eliminate any remaining evidence, including Sophia. And us. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Enzo stood abruptly, pulling out his phone. I'm sending you somewhere safe. Out of the city. I have a property in... Absolutely not. He looked at her sharply. This isn't negotiable. You're right. It's not. Teresa rose to her feet, meeting his glare with equal intensity. Because I'm not going anywhere. Teresa. Don't Teresa me like I'm some delicate civilian who needs protecting. She crossed her arms. I'm the one who connected Marco to the kidnapping. I'm the one whose memory is going to catch him making his next mistake. You want to bench your best player right before the final inning? That's not strategy. That's stupidity. It's keeping you alive. It's getting Sophia killed. Teresa's voice sharpened. Marco doesn't know what I can do yet. He doesn't know about my memory. That's our advantage, and you want to throw it away because you're scared I'll get hurt? I'm not scared, Enzo bit out. I'm realistic. He's already killed to protect this secret. He won't hesitate to... To what? Grab me? Threaten me? Try to intimidate me into silence? Teresa stepped closer, her eyes blazing. Newsflash. Moretti, you already tried that approach at Paradiso, and look how well it worked. I'm still here, I'm still fighting, and I'm not going anywhere until we finish this. They stood toe-to-toe, neither willing to back down. The tension between them was explosive, crackling with frustration and fear, and something deeper that neither wanted to name. Finally, Enzo's jaw unlocked. If something happens to you, then you'll avenge me spectacularly, I'm sure. Very dramatic, lots of fire. Teresa's expression softened slightly. But I didn't survive 20 years in the system by being fragile. I'm tougher than I look. I know you are. Enzo's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. That's what terrifies me. Before Teresa could respond, his phone buzzed. Enzo glanced at the screen, and his entire body went rigid. What? Teresa demanded. Text from Marco? Enzo's voice was flat. He wants to meet. Tonight. Says there's been a development in an old case he needs to discuss privately. He knows. Teresa's mind raced. He knows we're on to him. This is him making his move. Or, it's a trap. Obviously it's a trap. Teresa grabbed the phone from his hand, reading the message. But look where he wants to meet Red Hook, the old shipping district. She looked up sharply. That's where your family used to have warehouses, isn't it? Before you sold them off? Enzo's expression darkened. How did you? Page 247 of your father's business records. You liquidated the Red Hook properties in 2006, 1 year after Sophia disappeared. Teresa's eyes widened. Enzo. That's not just any warehouse district. That's where the sedan in the surveillance photo was registered. The plates traced back to a logistics company that operated out of Red Hook. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. He held her there, Enzo said, his voice hollow, in my family's own warehouse, right under my nose. For how long? I don't know, maybe weeks. Maybe. He stopped, unable to finish the thought. Teresa's mind was already 3 steps ahead, analyzing patterns and probabilities with ruthless efficiency. He's not asking you to meet there by accident. This is psychological warfare. He wants you emotionally compromised, distracted. She grabbed Enzo's arm. Which means Sophia might still be there, or evidence of where she is now, or it's a kill zone, and he's planning to eliminate the last person who knows the truth. Then we don't go alone. Teresa's voice was fierce. We bring backup, we wire you, we set our own trap inside his trap. Enzo stared at her, something like awe breaking through his anger. You want to use me as bait. I want to use us as bait. Teresa's smile was sharp and dangerous. He thinks he's in control. He thinks he's been 10 steps ahead for 20 years. But he doesn't know about me. He doesn't know what I can see, what I can remember. She squeezed his arm. Let him think he's won. Let him get comfortable. And then we take him apart. For a long moment, Enzo said nothing. Then he pulled her against him, kissing her hard and desperate, a soldier's kiss before a battle. When he released her, his eyes were dark and determined. We do this my way, he said. You stay in the car with armed security. You watch through surveillance feeds. The second anything goes wrong, I improvise spectacularly and save your ass, Teresa finished. I know. It's kind of my specialty. Despite everything, Enzo almost smiled. You're insane. You're the one who hired me. Teresa pulled out her phone, already mentally cataloging every detail she'd need to remember. Now let's go catch a traitor. 6 hours later, as the sun set over the Manhattan skyline, Enzo sent his reply to Marco. Tonight, Red Hook, come alone. The trap was set. And somewhere in the darkness, 20 years of lies were about to come crashing down. The hours before the meet crawled by with agonizing slowness. Enzo's penthouse had transformed into a war room. 3 of his most trusted men, handpicked from outside Marco's immediate circle, occupied the living space, checking weapons, testing communication equipment, reviewing tactical positions. The sterile white apartment now bristled with controlled violence, every surface mapped for lines of sight and exit strategies. Teresa sat at the dining table, surrounded by printouts of the Red Hook warehouse district. Satellite images, building schematics, old property records. She'd memorized every detail, building a three-dimensional map in her mind of a place she'd never physically been. Enzo stood by the window, arms crossed, his silhouette dark against the glittering cityscape. He'd barely spoken since sending the text to Marco. The weight of what they were walking into, what he was walking into, pressed down on him like a physical thing. "Your tactical approach is flawed," Teresa said suddenly, not looking up from the documents. Every head in the room turned toward her. Enzo's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Teresa tapped the warehouse schematic. "You're planning to enter from the east access point, where Marco will expect you. You're positioning backup at the perimeter. You're treating this like a standard confrontation." She finally looked up, her eyes sharp. "But this isn't standard. This is personal. And Marco knows that." "Your point?" "My point is that you're thinking like a strategist when you should be thinking like a victim." Teresa stood, moving to stand in front of him. "Marco didn't choose Red Hook randomly. He chose it because it's where Sophia was held, where your family's legacy was built and then abandoned. He wants you emotionally compromised the second you step through that door." One of Enzo's men, a lean, scar-faced operative named Luca, cleared his throat. "With respect, we've accounted for psychological factors. The boss knows intellectually," Teresa interrupted, her gaze never leaving Enzo's face. "But knowing and feeling are different things. The moment you walk into that building, you won't be thinking about tactical advantages. You'll be thinking about your sister. About 20 years of guilt and grief, about whether she suffered in that exact spot where you're standing." Her voice softened. "Marco is counting on that. He's counting on you being too distracted to see him coming." The room went silent. Enzo's expression was unreadable, but Teresa saw the muscle jumping in his jaw, the tension radiating through his shoulders. She was right, and he knew it. "So, what do you suggest?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "You don't go in first." "I do." "Absolutely not. Listen to me." "No." Enzo's hand shot out, gripping her arm, not hard but firm. "You're not stepping foot in that warehouse. That's non-negotiable." "Then send someone else ahead," Teresa pressed. "Someone Marco won't expect. Someone who can clear the space emotionally before you enter." She pulled her arm free, stepping closer until they were nearly chest to chest. "You can't afford to be vulnerable tomorrow night. Not for a single second. Because the moment you are, he'll use it to destroy you." The truth of it hung between them like a blade. Luca shifted uncomfortably. "She's not wrong, boss. Rinaldi's been manipulating your emotional responses for 2 decades. He'll know exactly which buttons to push." Enzo's hands curled into fists. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, to his men, "Give us the room." They filed out without question, the door clicking shut behind them. The silence that followed was suffocating. "You think I don't know what he's doing?" Enzo said finally, his voice raw. "You think I haven't spent 20 years analyzing every decision, every moment, wondering how much of it was real and how much was him pulling strings?" He moved closer, backing Teresa against the table. "I know it's a trap. I know he'll use Sophia against me. I know I should send someone else or walk away entirely." "Then why?" "Because she's my sister." The words came out broken, jagged. "Because I failed her once and I won't fail her again. Because if there's even a chance, even the smallest possibility that she's alive and he knows where she is, I have to be there." His hands came up to frame Teresa's face. "I have to look him in the eye when I make him tell me the truth." Teresa's chest ached. She understood that desperation, that bone-deep need for answers even when the cost was astronomical. She'd felt it herself every time she'd tried to remember the woman who'd given her the bracelet. "Then you go prepared," she said firmly, "emotionally armored. You walk in there knowing he'll try to break you, and you don't let him." Her hands covered his. "You remember that you're not alone anymore, that I've seen every ugly, painful part of your past, and I'm still standing here, still fighting with you." Enzo's forehead dropped against hers, his breath warm against her lips. "If something happens tomorrow, it won't. If it does," he continued, his voice fierce, "I need you to know something." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. "In 20 years, no one has ever looked at me the way you do, not with fear or calculation or the carefully maintained distance that comes with my name. You look at me like I'm human, like my pain matters, like I'm worth saving." "You are worth saving," Teresa whispered. "You're the only person who's ever made me believe that." Enzo pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "You've seen the worst of me. The violence, the control, the walls I've built so high I forgot what it felt like to let someone in. And you didn't run. You didn't flinch." His voice cracked. "You stayed." Teresa's vision blurred. "Because you're worth staying for. So are you." Enzo's kiss was gentle this time, achingly tender. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we find, you changed everything. You know that, right?" "I know you changed everything for me too." Teresa's fingers threaded through his hair. "I spent my whole life being invisible, forgettable. Someone the system could shuffle around without consequence. But you looked at me and saw someone powerful, someone essential." She swallowed hard. "You made me remember that I matter. You do matter." Enzo's arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest. "You matter more than you know." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, drawing strength from the contact. Outside, the city glittered with oblivious beauty. Inside, two people with matching scars prepared to walk into the fire together. Finally, Teresa pulled back. "We should rest. Tomorrow's going to be brutal," Enzo finished. "I know." But neither of them moved toward the bedrooms. Instead, they migrated to the couch, Teresa curling against Enzo's side, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. The tactical plans lay forgotten on the table. The weapons could wait. For these few stolen hours, they were just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their pasts, holding on tight before the storm. "Enzo?" Teresa murmured against his chest. "Yeah? Promise me something. Anything. Tomorrow, when we walk into that warehouse, promise me you'll come back out." Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. "Promise me this isn't the end." Enzo's arms tightened around her. "I promise. We both walk out. Together." It was a promise neither of them was certain he could keep. But in that moment, wrapped in each other's warmth, they let themselves believe it anyway. The Red Hook warehouse district looked like a graveyard for industrial ambition. Rusted shipping containers sat in crooked rows, their paint peeling, their doors hanging open like broken jaws. The main warehouse, a massive concrete structure with shattered windows and graffiti-scarred walls, loomed against the night sky, silhouetted by the distant glow of Manhattan across the water. Teresa sat in the back of the surveillance van 3 blocks away, watching Enzo's body camera feed on a monitor. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he approached the building's entrance, flanked by Luca and 2 other operatives positioned at careful intervals. "Comms check," she said into her headset, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Loud and clear," Enzo replied. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the tension beneath it. "Remember what we talked about," Teresa said quietly. "Don't let the location get in your head." "I know." A pause. "You see anything on thermal?" Teresa glanced at the second monitor, which showed heat signatures inside the warehouse. One figure, stationary, in the center of the main floor. "Marco's alone, center of the building, waiting for you. Or wants us to think he's alone. Luca's sweeping the perimeter. If there's backup, we'll know." Teresa's hands clenched in her lap. "Be careful. Always." The lie sat between them, acknowledged and ignored. Enzo pushed through the warehouse door. The interior was cavernous, lit only by moonlight filtering through broken skylights. Stacks of abandoned pallets created a maze of shadows. The air smelled of rust and decay and something older, the ghost of blood and fear that had soaked into the concrete decades ago. Marco stood in the center of the space, hands in his pockets, perfectly calm. He wore the same rectangular cufflinks Teresa had identified, the Rinaldi crest glinting in the dim light. "Enzo," he said, his voice echoing. "Thank you for coming." Enzo stopped 20 feet away, his hand resting casually near his concealed weapon. "You said there was a development." "There is." Marco smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd been waiting 20 years for this moment. "I thought it was time we stopped pretending." "Pretending what?" "That you didn't know." Marco's expression shifted, hardening. "That I didn't know you knew. That we weren't circling each other, waiting to see who'd strike first." He pulled his hands from his pockets empty, non-threatening. "Your little waitress is quite resourceful. Photographic memory. Impressive. She connected me to Sofia's disappearance in less than 48 hours. Do you know how long it took the Italian police? 3 years. And they still got it wrong." In the van, Teresa's blood ran cold. "Enzo, he knows about me. This is a confession," Enzo finished, his voice deadly quiet. His body camera showed Marco clearly, every micro-expression visible. "You took her." "I saved her," Marco corrected. "From your father's world, from the violence and corruption that would have destroyed her the way it destroyed everything else your family touched." "Where is she?" "Alive, safe, happy even." Marco took a step closer. "More than she would have been if she'd stayed with you." Teresa watched the monitor, her photographic memory overlaying the current feed with the old police photographs. The layout was identical, same support columns, same stacked pallets, same— Her breath caught. "Enzo," she said urgently into the comms. "The column behind Marco, fourth from the left. There's a structural weakness in the foundation. The old engineering report flagged it for demolition. If you can trigger the release mechanism—" "There is no release mechanism," Enzo muttered. "Yes, there is. Loading dock controls. Panel on the east wall, 20 feet to your right. Red switch. It'll drop the suspended container directly above him." On screen, she saw Enzo's hand twitch slightly acknowledgement. But Marco was still talking, his voice growing more intense. "Your father chose your bloodline over merit, over loyalty. Over everything my family sacrificed." He pulled something from his jacket, a photograph. "Sofia understands that now. She understands that I saved her from becoming another Moretti casualty." Enzo took a step forward, and Teresa saw it happening in real time, the emotional compromise she'd warned him about. His tactical awareness narrowing, his focus tunneling on Marco and the photo in his hand. "Let me see it," Enzo demanded. Marco held it up. Even through the grainy body camera feed, Teresa could see it was recent. A woman, early 30s, dark hair, standing in front of a small house, alive, smiling. Sofia. The shock hit Enzo like a physical blow. His hand dropped away from his weapon. "She's—" Marco moved. The gun appeared from behind his back with practiced speed, the barrel leveling at Enzo's chest. "I'm sorry it has to end this way. Truly. But you couldn't leave it alone." "Enzo!" Teresa screamed into the comms. "The panel! Now!" But Enzo was frozen, staring at the photograph, at 20 years of grief and guilt, suddenly compressed into a single image. His sister was alive. His sister was. Teresa didn't think. She grabbed the van's radio transmitter and switched to the emergency frequency, the one connected to the backup team's tactical gear. "Code red! East wall panel! Hit the red switch now!" Luca's voice crackled back. "Which panel?" 20 feet right of the entrance, do it!" On the monitor, she saw Luca burst through a side door, weapon drawn. He spotted the panel, slammed his palm against the red switch. The grinding of metal filled the warehouse. Above Marco, a suspended shipping container, forgotten, rusted, held in place by a failing pulley system, lurched free from its moorings. Marco looked up, eyes widening, diving sideways as 2 tons of steel came crashing down. It missed him by inches, slamming into the concrete with a sound like a bomb detonating. The impact shook the entire structure, sending dust and debris cascading from the rafters. Enzo snapped back to awareness, his training overriding shock. He moved while Marco was still off balance, closing the distance in 3 strides, his boot connecting with Marco's wrist and sending the gun skittering across the floor. "Don't move!" Luca shouted, his weapon trained on Marco. But Marco was laughing, a ragged, broken sound. "You'll never find her," he gasped. "Not without me. She's hidden so deep, so carefully you could search for another 20 years and—" Enzo's fist connected with his jaw, cutting off the words. Once, twice. Not wild, not emotional, clinical, controlled fury, distilled into precise violence. "You're going to tell me where she is," Enzo said quietly, dangerously. "And then you're going to spend the rest of your miserable life regretting that you didn't kill me when you had the chance." In the van, Teresa's hands shook as the adrenaline finally hit her system. She'd done it. They'd done it. Enzo was alive. 10 minutes later, Marco was secured, Luca and the team sweeping the warehouse for additional evidence. Enzo pushed through the van's rear doors, his eyes wild, searching until they found her. Then he was pulling her out, his hands framing her face, his forehead dropping against hers. "You saved my life," he breathed. "You promised you'd come back," Teresa whispered, her fingers clutching his shirt. "You promised. Because of you. All of this," his voice cracked. "My sister is alive because you saw what no one else could see. I'm alive because you remembered a detail from a 20-year-old engineering report." He kissed her, desperate and consuming. "I love you. God help me, I love you. I love you too," Teresa said against his mouth, and meant it with every fractured piece of her heart. The house was small, white, overlooking a harbor that glittered in the afternoon sun. Massachusetts. A town Enzo had never heard of, tucked between Cape Cod and Providence, population barely 15,000. Sophia had spent 20 years in a place so ordinary it was invisible, the perfect hiding spot for someone the world thought was dead. Teresa stood beside Enzo on the driveway, watching the emotions war across his face. His hands were shaking. She'd never seen them shake before. "I can do this alone," she offered quietly. "No." His voice was rough. "I've waited 20 years. I'm not." He stopped, unable to finish. Took a breath. "I'm not letting her out of my sight again." The door opened before they could knock. A woman stood in the threshold, early 30s, dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a cardigan and jeans, and her face, God, her face was the female version of Enzo's, the same sharp cheekbones, the same dark eyes, but softer somehow, lived in, marked by decades of loss. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Sophia's eyes found Enzo's, and everything stopped. "You," she whispered. "You're real." "Sophia." Enzo's voice cracked on her name. It was the first time Teresa had ever heard him sound uncertain, vulnerable, completely undone. "It's really—" Sophia crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, and threw her arms around him. The sound Enzo made, half sob, half laugh, pure anguish and joy twisted together, would stay with Teresa forever. His arms wrapped around his sister, pulling her close like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go for even a second. 20 years of grief poured out of him, all that careful control finally shattered. Teresa turned away, giving them privacy, and found herself crying despite not knowing these people, despite having no claim to this moment. But she felt it anyway, the profound weight of loss finally being healed. 5 minutes later, Sophia pulled back, keeping one hand on Enzo's face like she needed to verify he was real. Her eyes found Teresa. "You did this," Sophia said. "It wasn't a question." "Your brother did this," Teresa replied. "I just helped. She saved my life." Enzo added, his arm still locked around Sophia's shoulders. Multiple times. He paused, his gaze shifting to Teresa. She's everything. Sophia studied Teresa with an intensity that reminded her exactly who Enzo's family was. Then, slowly, she smiled. Come inside, I want to hear everything. The penthouse felt different when they returned at midnight. Sophia had taken a guest suite, emotionally exhausted but alive with the kind of fragile relief that came from impossible answers finally arriving. Enzo had called his team, set protocols in motion for Marco's trial, and handled a dozen logistics with the mechanical precision of someone running on adrenaline and pure will. Now, alone with Teresa in his study, he moved toward her like a man possessed. Don't, she said softly, holding up her hands. You need rest. I need you. Enzo caught her hands, pressing them against his chest so she could feel his heartbeat racing beneath his shirt. I need to know this is real. That you're real. I'm real. He pulled her closer, and Teresa let him, settling into the curve of his body as his arms wrapped around her from behind. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing, just existing in the same space. Then Enzo reached into his pocket. I've been carrying this for 3 days, he said quietly, waiting for the right moment. He placed something on her wrist, the matching bracelet. Identical to the one she'd worn her entire life. Same silver, same knotted charm, same elegant simplicity. But this one bore an engraving on the inside of the charm, so small she had to move into the light to read it. For my memory. For my future. For my reason. It's not an apology, Enzo said, his voice rough against her ear. It's a promise. You're not the lost piece of my past, Teresa. You're the beginning of everything I'm going to build, everything I want to be. His hands framed her face, tilting her head so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. I love you. Not because of the bracelet or the case or some cosmic alignment. I love you because you're fearless and brilliant, and you saw the man I wanted to be before I knew he was possible. Teresa's vision blurred. Enzo, marry me. It came out rough, unpolished, not at all like the controlled mafia boss who'd grabbed her wrist at Paradiso. This was raw desperation. Naked need. Not because of duty or partnership or strategy. Marry me because I can't imagine my life without you in it. She wanted to say yes. Every atom of her body screamed to say yes. Instead, she stepped back. I need to tell you something first, she said, her voice trembling slightly. About the bracelet. About where I really came from. Enzo's expression shifted, concern flickering across his features. What do you mean? I remember something. Not everything, but pieces. Teresa moved to the desk, sinking into a chair. After we found Sophia, something shifted. The memories started coming back. Fragments I'd blocked out, probably to protect myself. She swallowed hard. The woman who gave me the bracelet. She wasn't a stranger. Who was she? Your sister. Your biological sister. The one who came before you and Sophia. Teresa's voice shook. She was 14 when she was taken. But before she disappeared, she gave the bracelet to a friend, someone's daughter she was trying to protect. She said it would keep me safe. That it would help me remember that there was love in the world even when everything else fell apart. Enzo had gone absolutely still. You're telling me? I'm telling you that Sophia wasn't the only victim of Marco's revenge. There was someone else, someone who died protecting other people. Teresa met his eyes. I think she was going to die anyway, and she knew it. So she spent whatever time she had left trying to save as many people as she could, including me. The pain that crossed Enzo's face was exquisite, beautiful, heartbreaking. He'd loved that sister too, not as intensely as Sophia, because she'd been taken when he was young, but with the complicated affection of someone who'd lost a sibling before understanding what it meant to have one. What was her name? He whispered. I don't know. My mind protected itself, but I know she mattered. I know she loved you. Teresa stood, moving back to him. And I know that we need to honor her. We need to use everything we've learned, everything we are, to make sure no one else has to experience that kind of loss. Enzo pulled her against him again, his hand cradling the back of her head. Yes, he breathed. Yes to everything. Yes to you. Yes to the foundation. Yes to spending the rest of my life making sure her sacrifice meant something. So, that's a yes to the marriage proposal? Teresa asked, a hint of her usual sarcasm breaking through the emotion. Enzo pulled back just enough to kiss her deep and consuming and absolutely certain. That's a hell yes to the marriage proposal. She was wearing both bracelets now, one for the past, one for the future. And as Enzo held her in his study, both of them crying for the lost sister who'd never know what her kindness had started, Teresa finally understood what it meant to be found. 3 months later, the Moretti Foundation for Missing Persons opened its doors in a gleaming Manhattan tower overlooking Times Square. The ceremony was subdued by design, no press conferences, no media circus. Just a quiet, deliberate statement that something fundamental had shifted in the Moretti empire. The man who'd once built his fortune on fear and control had chosen instead to build something on redemption and healing. Teresa stood in the observation room above the main floor, watching the controlled chaos of their new beginning. 30 researchers, 12 specialized investigators, a cutting-edge database connected to law enforcement agencies across North America, and at the center of it all, a revolutionary new approach to cold cases, pattern recognition powered by advanced memory reconstruction techniques. Her technique. "You look terrified," Sophia said, stepping up beside her. "I look terrified because I am terrified," Teresa admitted. "What if it doesn't work? What if we're building this on theory and good intentions, and then you'll fix it?" Sophia squeezed her hand, and Teresa was struck again by how much she looked like her brother when she smiled. "You've already solved 47 cases in development phase. 47 families finally have answers because of you, because of what you can do." Downstairs, Enzo stood at the podium, speaking to the assembled staff and board members. He wore a dark suit, his bearing as controlled and commanding as ever, but his eyes held something new. Something softer. Purpose without cruelty. "The Moretti name has meant power," he was saying, his voice carrying through the room. "For 3 generations, it meant control, strength, the kind of dominion that came from being feared. Today, we're changing what that name means. We're making it mean hope. We're making it mean that no one disappears without someone fighting to bring them home." He paused, his gaze finding Teresa's in the observation window. "This foundation exists because of one woman's extraordinary mind and an even more extraordinary heart." Teresa Marquez believed that a waitress and a man she didn't know could solve 20 years of unsolved trauma. She was right. But more than that, she believed I could be better. That we could all be better. Enzo's voice grew quieter, more intimate. "Teresa has agreed to be the Foundation's Director of Investigative Services. She will lead the effort to find the missing, to honor the lost, to make sure that every family gets the answers they deserve." Teresa felt Sophia's hand squeeze hers. "In addition," Enzo continued, and now there was definitely amusement in his voice, "she's agreed to marry me, probably because she felt obligated after I made an embarrassing speech at dinner last week about how she's the only good thing I've ever done." The room erupted in laughter. Teresa rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "He absolutely did say that." "Did you tell him he was dramatic?" Sophia asked. "I called him a narcissistic control freak with abandonment issues masquerading as romance." Teresa's smile widened. "He liked it." "That tracks," Sophia said. Downstairs, Enzo was wrapping up. "We've lost too much to this organization, too many people to violence, to revenge, to the blind pursuit of power. The Moretti Foundation won't bring them back, but it will make sure that their loss has meaning. It will make sure that other families don't suffer the way ours has." He stepped back from the podium to polite, measured applause. But when his eyes found Teresa's again, it was just them. Nobody else in the room. Nobody else existed in that moment but two people who'd found each other in the rubble of their pasts and chosen to build something beautiful from it. Later, after the ceremony, after the press had dispersed and the staff had filed out, Enzo found her in the archives room, the heart of the foundation, lined with thousands of cold case files, each one a missing person, each one a family's unanswered prayer. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "About the foundation?" "No." Teresa turned from the wall of photos. "About marrying you?" "Every single day, but not the kind of second thoughts that make me leave." Enzo crossed the room in 3 strides, cupping her face in his hands. "That's the best I'm ever going to get from you, isn't it?" "Oh, definitely." She kissed him, tasting his smile against her mouth. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life telling you exactly how complicated you are. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life worshiping you for it." He pulled back, his eyes serious now. "Teresa, I need you to know something. This foundation, it's not charity or guilt or some attempt at redemption. It's the only thing that makes sense anymore. Our life, your work, everything we're building." He gestured around them at the photographs covering the walls. "These are our legacy." Teresa looked at the faces, the missing, the forgotten, the people no one else was searching for. She thought about the woman who'd given her the bracelet. About Sophia, lost for 20 years but finally found. About all the other families still waiting, still hoping, still believing that someone would remember. "I want to do more," she said suddenly. Enzo's eyebrow raised. "More?" "Training programs. Not just for investigators, but for people like me, people with exceptional memory, people in foster care who developed these skills as survival mechanisms." Her mind was already running ahead, organizing, structuring. "They're scattered, forgotten, working jobs that waste their talent. We recruit them, we train them, we build a network of memory specialists across the country." "The Memory Project," Enzo said slowly. "I like it." "Of course you do. I'm brilliant." Teresa moved toward one particular wall, her wall, the cases she'd personally solved. "And I want them to know it's okay to be brilliant. That the survival skills we developed in broken systems can be transformed into tools that save lives." Enzo pulled her back against his chest, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You're going to change the world." "We're going to change the world," she corrected. "That was the deal, remember? Equal partnership. Everything's equal with you," Enzo murmured against her hair. "I gave up the dominance thing about 2 months ago. You made it impossible to go back." Teresa smiled, leaning into him. She reached up, touching the 2 bracelets on her wrist, one silver and worn from 27 years of her life, one new and gleaming, placed there by a man who'd learned to love instead of control. "Do you ever think about how random it all was?" she asked quietly. "I could have called in sick that night. You could have sent someone else to make the reservation. If you'd called in sick, I would have found you anyway," Enzo said matter-of-factly. "Some things are inevitable." "That's very romantic, and also very threatening. Do you realize that?" "I do now." She felt him smile against her hair. "It's one of the things I love most about you. You keep me honest about how much of what I say is beautiful and how much is just rich person controlling behavior." "Most of it is rich person controlling behavior." Teresa turned in his arms. "But you're working on it." "I'm getting there." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her mouth. "Because you're making me want to be the man you believed I could be, even when I didn't believe it myself." "That's not love," Teresa said. "That's just you being inspired by my photographic memory and problem-solving skills." "It's definitely love." Enzo pulled her closer, kissing her until she couldn't think straight, until the world narrowed to just the 2 of them in the archive room, surrounded by the missing and the forgotten. "You know how I know?" "How?" "Because every time you smile at one of the caseworkers, every time you stay up all night studying a cold file, every time you refuse to accept 'we tried' as an answer, I fall in love with you all over again." He cupped her face in his hands. You're going to find them, Teresa. Every single person that no one else believes is findable, you're going to bring them home. We're going to bring them home, she corrected. Remember? Equal partnership. Always equal. Enzo kissed her one more time. Now come on. Sophia's waiting with champagne. And if I know your future sister-in-law, she's already drinking it without us. She absolutely is. Teresa took his hand, letting him pull her toward the door. Behind them, the walls of photographs seemed to shimmer with possibility, not just cases waiting to be solved, but futures waiting to be reclaimed. 2 years later, the Moretti Foundation would crack 43 cold cases. The Memory Project would recruit and train 200 investigators with exceptional recall. And Teresa would wear her 2 bracelets everywhere, one for the woman who'd given her the tools to survive, one for the man who'd given her the courage to thrive. The bracelet had changed everything, just like Enzo said it would. But not because of the jewelry itself, because of what 2 people had decided to do with the scars it represented. I hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to hit subscribe, rate this story from 1 to 10 inches, the comments, and check out the next video waiting for you.